Today we have the privilege of having with us Dan Walker, hometown of Mayville, North Dakota. And we're going to visit with him a little while here. He was in World War II, over 50 years ago now. He was one of the crew members on the B-24, shot down and became a prisoner of war and served his time in prison camp, come back after the war, and we have him here today, so we're privileged to hear his story. So, Dan, you can just start right out and tell me how it went, or where you started from, or went to school and so on.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm going to begin my story about in the year of 1941. I'm in college, second year, and it's a new school year, and the new friends are coming in, and then they are just having a really good time, and then all of a sudden it's December 7th.
What college was this now?
Mayville State.
Mayville State, yeah.
And then we had a moment of apprehension and also bewilderment and disbelief, but we knew it was the real thing when we saw the pictures and heard the news. So therefore, our friends in the National Guard began to be called up and leave, and they left school. And then, of course, us other fellows that weren't in the Guard are thinking about our choices, knowing that sooner or later we were going to go. So I took a choice of Air Force, and I went down to Minneapolis in the summer of '42 and took some tests to get in the cadet program. And I was fortunate enough to pass the tests. And I was enlisted and sworn in August 12th, 1942. I was a reserve person, soldier. Then I waited around, and in February of '43, I got the call to report to Fargo at a recruiting station and put me on a bus, and I was on my way. And we went down to Minneapolis, and then we were put on a train and headed for San Antonio Reclassification Center with a lot of boys from Minnesota. And as we went along, we picked up more in Iowa, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma. And so when we arrived at San Antonio Classification Center, we were quite a group. And the first thing we do is have your physical, and then get those general physicals where they run through and see if you're warm, and then go in that line. Well, it's a little more than that, but it's always an Army joke. And then they also fitted us with clothing, and we were supposed to be all set to be soldiers. Well, that went fine. We did that later on in the classifications for a couple of days, and then we started sessions. And our class was 43K, and we didn't have much chance to get really into anything exciting because we were underclassmen. And underclassmen in those at a classification center or cadet system, we were hazed as underclassmen. The class ahead of us had us on the move. They bounced quarters on our bed, and if it didn't fit the measurements, we'd tear our beds up and we'd make our bed. I know one night I think I made my bed 20 times just because he stood there and was miserable. And then they also had, when we went to eat, that got to be a problem with the cadets. We had to go when there was 12 at a table, I think, and 8 upperclassmen and 4 underclassmen had to be every time. And one of the underclassmen had to be the gunner. He sat at the end of the table, and whenever they needed another plate of pork chops or whatever they wanted, and of course the upperclassmen always took the choice, and us other guys he had to sit there and hold his hand up and get the staff to bring him more food. And then they also said another thing is the underclassmen all had to sit there rigid and eat a square meal, and they did like this. This was a square meal. Well, between gunning and square mealing, you often didn't get much to eat. They ended up with a lot of bread and butter and peanut butter. And then that was always as the rest were clearing out, and then they'd hurry you out of there. But that was the cadet system as far as the hazing part. And then we picked they took us out and they made us pick rocks and cigarette butts out on the parade ground. Excuse me. And as a matter of discipline. I don't know why they were disciplining us. I thought we were all pretty good guys. But they all thought we needed some more discipline. And some of it got to be so bad that you were physically about ready to break down. They'd make you, they'd say laugh, and then you'd laugh. What are you laughing about? And then they'd laugh. So it was just part of the plan, and so we stood it. Some of the guys kind of lost it, but I don't recall any of our group. But then as we became, after 4 weeks, we became upperclassmen. And then some of our guys were really ready to get ready into us. But we found it didn't take more than a couple of days, and they had to call off the hazing because they brought in the class following us for old GIs that had applied to get into the cadets flying program, and they didn't take that malarkey, and it got to be some bloody fights. So they called off the hazing, which I was glad for because I didn't think it impressed anything. It was a matter of getting your revenge, and I didn't feel I needed that. And so then from there we went into, of course, all the time we're going to class and also having parades and have physical education.
What kind of classes were you having?
We're having physics classes. I'm a little...
Mathematics?
Yeah,
English?
yeah, right. My biggest trouble was code. You know,
yeah.
You had to bang
Morse
it out.
code.
Yeah, right. I don't know whether I didn't have a good ear or not. But anyway, we went through the pre-flight bit, and I was 8 weeks, and then for some reason or other, I didn't get my code finished in time, so I was held back for another 4 weeks. So therefore, I was sort of incognito. I didn't belong to any class particularly. I was just hanging around. So I spent a lot of time in the supply room, sleeping up on the mattresses, because they didn't have any jobs for me. But I finally got an assignment, and my pre-flight assignment was to Cuero, Texas. And we went there to fly in PT-17s, Fairchilds. And it was more classes, more high ed and more physical training, make sure that we were in perfect shape. But
What kind of, was that a single wing?
Yeah,
plane?
yes.
Fairchild.
Yeah, and it had...
Did you fly that some?
Yes, and we finally had airplanes, like I say, the PT-17. And I had a great instructor, and so I soloed within a minimum of 8 hours. So I had flying wasn't any problem for me because I was mechanically adaptive to that type of work, I guess, because it's the flying came easy. But then my instructor got a cold and had to stay home one day, and so I got assigned a line first lieutenant to it, and I think he thought I was up for a check because he said, well, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'd just been told that our next step was going to be spins and stalls by my instructor, so a dummy like me, I said, oh, we're doing spins and stalls. Well, he said, okay, so he climbed in the plane and we took off, and we got up in the air, and for 20 minutes we spun and did stalls, and I never touched the stick. And so he came back and landed the plane and got out, and he said, well, he said, son, you can probably fly good enough for civilians, but not for the Army. And I got a pink slip. Well, my instructor came back a couple of days later, and he said, what's the matter here? What's with this pink slip? And I said, well, told him what happened, and he said I should go to the board, before the board, and appeal it, because he said there's something wrong here. But I was so angry, and I said, to heck with it. And therefore, then I became Private Walker, and off to a new classification center. And from there, I was sent to Shepherd Field in Wichita Falls, Texas. And we got there, and they were going to have us basically drill us like more on out in that 100 and some degrees of temperature. And I did one day of drill, and I found a hole under the barracks where I could crawl under the barracks and read funny books while the boys were out drilling, and that's where I spent my mornings, come out and go to meals. And we got reclassified by taking those tests, you know, the round holes and the square blocks, and round holes are squares, and whatever you do to. And they said, well, your choice now is gunnery school or radio school. Well, I kind of liked radio, so I said I wanted to go to radio school. And besides that, radio school in Sioux Falls was close to my home, and if I were to get there. So I got gunnery school, which is, and off to Harlingen, Texas. And then we were down there, and we took some more classes and some more.
Were you staying on the ground now, or were you in the air, the gunnery school?
I was gunnery school, but we did, we took some more classes on armament when we got there, because we were going to be gunnery. And then we did fly, and we flew out over that, I can't think of the island now, on the Gulf. But anyway, now half of it's built up into multi-million-dollar hotels where the college kids go for their vacations. But anyway, we flew over that and did all our gunnery stuff that we needed. And after, I think it was 4 weeks, 6 weeks, I don't remember the exact time, we completed a gunnery course. Excuse me. And that was... well, that was kind of a different thing. We were flying with in 88s, the advanced training plane, and we were shooting 30 calibers. So we burned up a lot of ammunition.
They were towing a target then.
Yeah, they were towing targets, and then we were doing also ground, air to ground.
Oh yeah.
And so I don't know how we ever did, you know, with our shooting, because those targets, we never got the reading of it, but it must have been good enough to let us move on. And so after that length of time, we were sent up to Kearns, Utah, Salt Lake City. Isn't that Kearns? Yeah, Kearns Field, Salt Lake City. And but on the way, we were able to get a leave of 10, 15 days and a leave en route, so I got a chance to get home. But you go from southern Texas to North Dakota, you've almost shot half your leave by trying to make plane connections. And but we did get there, and I visited the folks and a friend of mine, and it was really enjoyable. And from there we went on out to Salt Lake City, and I think the purpose of us going there was to be a decision of what way we were going to go to Europe or to Asia, and also to put our crews together. Now, I don't know definitely that, but that's what happened. And there again, we were just ordinary soldiers, and we worked in the supply depot in between times. And when they did get our crew and see the officers, they're all in schools. And when GIs, they don't have too much to work on. I mean, a radio man, we did a little radio work when we were there, and then, but it wasn't concentrated because it was just general. And then they sent us on. They said after, I suppose, 4 weeks, 3 weeks, they put us together, and we went on down to Biggs Field as a crew.
Where's that at?
El Paso, Texas. Right down along the Guadalupe Mountains.
Sure.
And from then we got into armament again.
Were you with your crew now?
Yeah, we were with our crew.
That you were going to be sent overseas with?
Yes, we did. They put together, and then they went to all their briefing and their training, and soldiers, enlisted men, we were in armament again. We were able to take down our turret guns blindfolded.
Now,
and,
on this crew, how many men did you have on your crew?
We had 10. We had 10 guys. Men. Oh yeah, there they are. And those are the guys that were put together to fly this as a crew.
B-24 in the background.
B-24 in the background. I don't know what the model is, but B-24 is this ship, and I think they call them ships, don't they?
Well,
anyway.
Yeah, you can call them a ship.
And the airplane. Up in here we have our our pilot and co-pilot, and the engineer is on a deck right in about here. Radio operator is right behind there. Right in here, there's 4 people right in here. The pilot, co-pilot, engineer, and radio operator. Okay, now the duties up in the front here was a bombardier and a navigator. Excuse me. Now, and this turret up in front here was usually manned by one of those 2, usually the bombardier, because unless he wasn't busy except on the bomb runs. The upper turret was by the engineer. He operated that one. And if they needed, the engineer would take that, but they always try to keep the engineer close to his duties. And back
the engineer is located right behind the pilot and co-pilot.
Yeah, right. And there all the gauges are and they're important, those gauges. I'll tell you about them again later. Now, back here is 2 waist windows. And that's where I am. We had 2 waist gunners.
Yeah.
We had a Sperry ball. This thing we lower and raise on flight. They wouldn't have been able to get me in there without a court-martial, I don't think, in flight anyway. I didn't think much of that one, but I suppose I'd had to. And then the tail gunner back in here. Now that takes care of the 4 people or the 10 people on the crew. Now we'll have and their duties as we travel along here. After we got these together, we were sent to Topeka, Kansas.
That is, now, were you with a group of airplanes or just one?
Just us, just our group, just our one
your
ship.
plane.
Yeah.
You went to Topeka, Kansas.
And we went, and we were assigned to a brand new B-24. And then we were briefed on the plane, and then by that time we almost felt we knew all the plane because we'd been, going back to El Paso or Briggs Field. We flew B-24s, but they were all ones that have called back and been reconditioned. And then we flew up and down the range in New Mexico. And the first time we went out with the gunners, we all fired our rounds dutifully. And we came back, and the guy said one of his guns had stuck and got scored. And they were going to charge him for the barrel. So from then on, we went out and we'd take about 6 shots so the armament men would have something to clean. And then we'd throw the bullets out on the New Mexico desert. So there's a lot of ammunition out there. And all the time, we were shooting, the bombardier was making his practice runs and so forth. And our bombardier, he was probably as poor bombardier as there was. I don't think he could hit the wastepaper basket from his desk. But anyway, we made a lot of runs, and finally the navigator said, "Let me do it." And he did with his toe and his eye, and he dropped a couple bombs on the practice targets, so we were passed. Thank goodness we did group bombing otherwise. Anyway, the poor fellow didn't last. But then now we were gone to Topeka and assigned this new airplane. And then
I think those airplanes, they were built either at the Ford plant in Detroit or down at Fort Worth.
Somewhere in there, yeah. That's, I don't know exactly. See, I'm not, that kind of information I'm not I don't know.
No.
But then we flew from Topeka to Miami and just touched down.
Just one
plane, yeah. One crew, one plane. From Miami, we went to Puerto Rico for fuel. And while we were fueling up, we had 3 rain showers. You know, they'd come through there and then they'd flip down the cover and not get water to gas. And as soon as the shower went by, we'd put in more gas. The crew would. I didn't have anything to do with that except we had to stay by our plane, because from there we flew to Trinidad. And then we were there, and we were held in Trinidad for 2 days while we had a 25-hour check on our airplane there. And while we were there, the crew was allowed a little liberty. We were not allowed to go into Port of Spain. But we were able to travel around on that island a little bit. And so we decided to take a little walk on one of these trails. And as we walked up there, all of a sudden there was water running. And so we decided to follow where that water was running. And we came to a place where it went over a little, about a 12-foot stone cliff. And there was a big dish down and below with beautiful swimming water. So we spent those 2 days going up there and swimming in this nice, clear, cool pool. And it wasn't real cold because it was coming out of the jungle, but it was nice swimming, and it was one of the luxuries we had on that trip in Trinidad. And then from Trinidad we went to Belém, Brazil, and that's just up on the northeast corner.
It's on the mouth of the Amazon River.
yes, it was. And then we checked in there, and we were held there for 2 days because one of the boys had a cold, and they didn't want to send him out on overseas until they'd given him a chance to give him some medicine and get it to work. So we stayed there, and we had people come and want to clean our tent. And bananas were about a whole big bunch of bananas for a dime, and they'd bring them to you. But then we were cautious with that because we weren't smart enough to know if they were healthy or not. Anyway, from then we took off from Belém, Brazil, and flew to Dakar, Africa.
Right, you didn't go to Fort Laser then. You went right from
on direct over.
Right.
And it was a 14-hour flight. And we had a good navigator. He brought us in right down the runway. But we came in with about 10 gallons of gas, I think.
Man, it was a pretty rough weather, didn't you, over the?
No, we had nice. That night we flew just beautifully. I sat up in the front turret, Emerson turret, and just watched the stars go by and had a little naps. And so when we came in the next morning in Dakar, and then we stayed with the plane all day. But us fellows, and it took turns rather, and we went to eat, and because we didn't dare leave the plane unguarded. And so, like a dummy, I volunteered to stand guard at night. And that got to be an experience because we had these little black boys come, and they wanted cigarettes. And they were all armed, and then so... anyway, one was banging on the side of the airplane, and me, again, another experience of being a little stupid is that I lifted the window and had the flashlight in my hand and shone right in this boy's face, and all I saw was a row of white teeth, and he was begging for cigarettes. Well, I didn't have any cigarettes, so I quickly closed the door, but if he'd have been wanting something else, I could have been a pincushion. Anyway, I was glad when the morning light came. Of course, they had patrols all night, but these tribal soldiers were able to duck the patrol and hide, but they didn't bother. It's except that I was a little scared, and it was another experience. Then from Dakar, our next mission, our next leg of our trip was to fly over the desert, Sahara, over the western edge of Sahara, up into Morocco, to Marrakesh. And on that range of mountains, we had to find a particular pass, or else you could end up on the side of the mountains, they said. But we were fortunate enough to be able to find it on the first pass, so we didn't have to fly around and look for it.
You didn't land anywhere on the desert for gas. You flew directly from Dakar
to Marrakesh. Yeah, right. And there we found. There I found another new experience. My first look at the have-not nations, as we had these Arabs, poor, starving people. As we went to lunch or dinner, and whatever we didn't eat, we were to go out and scrape in a garbage can like GIs do, you know. And there we came out, and here was one of those guys with a gallon can just scooping up the garbage to take to his family. And they all were wanting to wear, they all wore mattress covers, so to speak. And if you had an extra mattress cover, or we could get one from supply, well, they would buy it from you, but we were very careful. We didn't do any of that, but that's the stories we were told. So we stayed there 2 days, and the city, the old ancient city of Marrakesh, was walled. It's a walled city, and some of our fellows wanted to get in there, but they were warned not to. If they went in, they might not ever come back out. So there were some you learned something about how other people live, and it wasn't always. You can see where they have problems with.
Now, you still had just one crew and one plane.
Just one crew,
You weren't
right.
Okay.
But there were others on the same route.
Oh, yeah,
And
sure.
then we passed. And we had a crew. Our crew was pretty good at not drinking, but we had one fella that liked to get a drink. And so even in a desert down in Morocco, he was able to come up with some wine. I don't know what he traded to get it, but he got a couple jugs of wine. And so he was happy with his time there. From Morocco, we were to fly to England, which was supposed to be our destination, and it was. And so we're flying at night, and they said you could run into trouble, so be alert. And so we're flying along being alert, and we could see lights off to our right, and our pilot kept fudging off. Finally, the navigator called up and said, we'll probably get to New York before we get to England if you don't straighten out your flight and get back on course. Well, and they did, and we did. And so we got into, I think, somewhere down around Southampton. I don't know where the staging area was in England. And we were there for a few days, and that was the last we saw of our airplane, because it was taken from us and assigned to some other group. So we were put on plane, and we're flown up to Ireland. My wife always likes this when I talk about Ireland. She got a little Irish, so. But we were flown up there and put in the tin huts in the mud and the rain, and so my opinion of Ireland is not probably as rosy as my wife. But anyhow, we were there for, they gave us lectures on treating the people in England and Ireland, and some social trainings, I suppose you'd say, along with some more discussion on weather and what we should be knowing. And we were there, I think, 3 weeks, and then they found a place for our whole crew and sent us to the bomb group 458th. It's a heavy bomb group in Norwich, England, and Norfolk area. And so we got there, and after a day or two of just settling in, getting our bag unpacked, we started flying. One fellow with another established crew, and the pilot would go with one, and the co-pilot would go with one. And I got in on 2 trips. The first crew I went out on was I don't remember anything particular about it, but it's just a nice crew. I mean, they accepted me as a rookie, and we were out and we were watching airplanes off to the horizon. And so I thought one was getting a little close, so I let off a short burst of my 50, and the pilot called back. He said, "Who's shooting back there?" And the guy next to me said, "Oh, it's the rookie." And he said, "Well, tell him he wouldn't have got those planes with a 20 millimeter, and no need to be shooting off the gun, so keep them back." And that was the only shooting I'd done after all these months of gunnery range.
Were they enemy planes that you were shooting at?
Yeah, they were. Yeah. I think they were.
Yeah.
I mean, I identified them as Messerschmitts, but might have been Messerschmitts, but like they said, it was too far. So we never shot another. I never shot another round of shooting. In fact, none of our crew did. But then after a couple trips not everyone got to fly with other crews, but my pilot and co-pilot did, and navigator and bombardier did too, I think, to get to acclimatize to the conditions of flying and what was going on, experience. And we went to we got in a group. Next time after a period of that, we got our own crew on a plane to fly with the group on a target. Now, our plane was called a bucket of bolts. That I can remember. And it was a fuel. It ate up a lot of fuel. And my engineer said, "Hey, we got to get out of here." So we didn't have too long a mission, but we had a heavy load. So we dumped when the bombers all dropped their load, they dropped us, and our pilot just wheeled and headed for England to get back as close as we could.
You weren't too far over in Europe then.
Yeah,
that mission.
No, that mission was just in northern France, over by Calais or up towards the Belgian border, not too far. Anyway.
What date was this about?
Well, this would be in May, 44.
May of 44.
Yeah,
okay.
I don't know the exact date.
No, but
but like I say, we had what they called a bucket of bolts, and it was kind of almost a reclaimed plane by that time. So we found that we weren't going to have enough fuel to make it to our own base, so we started looking for a field. Well, we saw a small field and headed for it, but on the approach leg, the old engine started sputtering, so they leveled it off. And when they pulled the wheels back up, I knew something was wrong. So I told the other fellow that was back with me to prepare. And so they took it right into a pasture.
The plane.
Yeah, right. And of course, the 4 boys on Bombay or the lower flight deck were all killed on that on our first mission back. And the rest of us were all pretty good, except our pilot was jumping around whining about about the loss of the plane and what it would do to his flying record. And the co-pilot said, "Hey, you think of the boys we just killed? I'll get that." So we got a month of R&R.
Well, those guys that were killed, when you landed, then the front end of the plane was crushed.
Yeah, right. You know, B-24, you can stand here and you can see right underneath it.
Yeah.
But when it got through crashing, we could stand there and see over it. And of course, we had all that ammunition on.
Yeah.
We dropped the bombs, but we had our ammunition.
It didn't catch fire.
No, but they were popping like the guns or bullets were going off. So there was heat in there. I don't know if it burned because they took us out of there as soon as they could.
Yeah.
As soon as the.
What did they do with the men that were killed there in that mission?
Well, that I don't know.
No.
I didn't have any. I got a shot of flak, so I was taken to a hospital not flak, but a bust in the mouth and a metal. So I was taken to the hospital and of course they wanted to check us all for shock. So we stayed there for, I suppose a day. Then they came and flew us up to our own base, and then we got our R&R, which we could take in London, and that was another experience because we'd never been to London, any of us. So we went in there and we just sort of paraded around, and we got 6 days, I think, in London, but we didn't have enough money to stay 6 days, so we went and we couldn't. Well,
you went there by train then from your base?
Yeah, we did.
And you went back by train?
Yeah, right. And it took them till the middle of June to get us a crew. But then the middle of June we started, well, no, we're not middle of June because we flew D-Day. I suppose the end of June.
End of May.
End of May, 1st of June. They had our crew on the road again. And I think D-Day was probably one of the first missions that we flew again together. And that was was an experience because the weather was not really conclusive to the Air Force. But they put up the whole 8th Air Force and only had a narrow strip of clearing. And we were flying, trying to get into formation. And we had one squadron go right over us, and they could have reached out and touched them. And that was pretty hectic. But we made it, and we dropped our bombs in block formation that day. You know, Elmer, that's familiar to you. Mm-hmm. Not to pick the target, they just said, go, we're going in, like so, and they take and sweep them out in the St. Low area. Mm-hmm. And that's where ours was dropped. And then, and like I said, during the time of my missions, we never fired a shot. That we had planes go through our squadron or group.
Enemy planes.
Yeah, trying to harass us. And then, of course, they came out with jets. Well, jets were not were efficient for them.
Oh.
As far as we were taking on our planes, because our speed was so that they couldn't keep the trajectory long enough to get the shells into it.
Yeah.
So they just sort of gave up on that because they were last resort of it, and then put them to dropping bombs on targets along the English coast and stuff. And another thing, the barrage booms, V bombs that they had, they shot over from France and Belgium towards London, and they were they're unmanned things. But then the British put up barrage fields where they had their balloons on cable, and that was to take and intercept those things. Well,
we call them a buzz bomb.
Yeah, buzz bombs, yeah, V bombs, yeah.
Yeah.
And we got caught out on a mission when the weather closed in, and we had to head for England, and we headed right into that field of barrage balloons with B-24s, and there was 6 of them going like this to get back into but we got through them and got back to an auxiliary field, and then but we put in 6 planes on a small field, and we cleaned out their commissary without any trouble at all, because they came in to eat all their oranges and eggs, and that mission was one where we were sent out. The 6 planes were sent out in the afternoon to fly just prior to V-Day, or D-Day rather, had to get the guns along the coast to fire so they could take readings on them. And we were fortunate we didn't lose any of them, because we had very evasive action on that. We flew just weaving around, all 6 airplanes. Lucky they didn't come together. But we did that. Our pilot did a good job on that. And that's about the extent of that. And then, of course, some of the harrowing experiences was our crash landing. That I remember quite.
That's that first trip.
Yeah, that's the landing.
You don't recall if you landed by a field called Manston?
No, I have no idea what we were.
Sorry.
And another harrowing experience was the heavy flak or the submarine pens from Hamburg to Brendan. You could run in there, and boy, they could make a beautiful bright day.
Now
black.
you were bombing into Germany now.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and
these were pretty long missions.
They long in that it took us along to Marshall. I mean, we flew around England to get before we went on a target, and then I just told you about the trip up the coast to bring out the gun installations, and then getting caught away from the base by the weather and having to fly through that barrage balloons, and then D-Day was the takeoff at 11 o'clock, I think, is our time, if I recall right. But anyways, because we hit just ahead of the people going in on the beaches.
On the beaches, yeah.
And they said, as we flew over, they said, now for any reason you have to abandon your airplane over the channel rather, be sure you pick on a boat that's coming back. Don't take one going in, because you don't want to go in there. And they were the channel was so full of boats that you could almost walk across. Man, but it was something you'll never forget.
How high were you flying then on those missions in the channel there?
Well, and that day I don't know if we were more than 20,000.
No.
I don't know on that. And that would be, most of the time it was 10 to 20,000. We didn't...
But on those missions into Germany, how high were you there?
Well,
you were pretty high there.
Yeah, about 20,000.
20,000.
I mean, I'm guessing now. I'm not... I know when we jumped it, we were down to about 15,000 when we had to leave.
Did you have oxygen on your mission?
Yeah, always, yeah.
Did you start the oxygen on the ground, or you wait until you got up to 10,000?
No, we got up to 10,000, because we didn't... and then the one big thing, of course, was our plane taking a hit over Saarbrücken. and that was on the mission where we were shot down.
That's in the Ruhr Valley,
Yeah, in the Ruhr Valley.
along the Rhine River, in Germany.
Right, yeah, and the reason, well, not the reason, Patton had started moving through France in August, and so the Germans were starting to move out their heavy guns to make a defensive stand on the Siegfried line and all that kind of stuff. So we ran into trainloads of anti-aircraft guns, and we were lucky enough to get a shot, and the shot we got came up right through here between the fuselage and the number 3 engine, and it caused a fire. And so our pilot was said, "Be prepared to leave."
The plane was on fire then?
Well, there was flames coming back
oh,
here.
Yeah.
And so we gathered, and when he said, "Prepare to leave," I'm sitting here swinging my feet here, and the radio operator's swinging his feet up here because we'd already crashed one. We wouldn't want to get caught, and we were ready to go. Yeah. So when they hit the bell, well, off we went.
That's the emergency bell, yeah.
Yeah, and bailout bell. And
where were you? Where were you now?
Over Saarbrücken.
Yeah.
Right. And
about 20,000 feet, you say?
About 15, I suppose, because we'd turned back on an aborted mission, and those things. We were in good position, and by the time we were flying over the target, we'd dropped into a poor lower element, and we shouldn't have been there. But anyway, that fire cost us to get out of there.
How many were there? Other planes that hit that day?
I don't know, Elmer. There weren't many caught up in that area when we got on the ground, except our crew that I know of. We didn't. They might have gone farther down the line because there was a long railroad train, a lot of cars, and I dropped into a rutabaga field, kohlrabi they called them, and of course I hit one right on the end of my foot and snapped the ankle, and so therefore I was kind of slow on realizing, well, I wouldn't have gone anyplace anyway. But anyway, these villagers came out. I was about a third of a mile from a village, and these villagers came out raving and hollering and really ferocious, which I could see if I was somebody was bombing my house, I'd be a little distraught also. But anyway, they came, and it's something like the National Guard boy or a couple of the younger fellas came, and they, with their weapon, he had a shotgun. I don't know, he wasn't too much of a soldier, but I suppose he was keeping people in line. But as they walked me into town, you walked with your hands behind your head like so, and he kept banging me on the hands with his gun barrel and prodding you. And then every time that somebody went by with a stick or whatever they had, they'd let you have it across the back. I went down a couple of times, and they jerked me back up to walk some more. And
were you alone now, or were others
I'm
with
alone.
You were alone.
And as I'm walking along, here comes a lady with a grub hoe, and I thought, God, if she lets me have it with that, that's going to be the end of my experience. But I got beat up pretty good on the way in. And then I got into this collection center where these home guard people were, and they kept shooting German questions at me, or questions at me in German. I didn't understand a word of it, except that they wanted cigarettes, and they already gotten them. And so then a young buck pulls his bayonet out of his sheath and sticks it into my ribs and says something, and I don't know what he said. But I was prepared to leave this world, and I didn't really care at that time. And so, because I had terrific pain, they walked me all the way in on a broken ankle. And so when I got to this collection point, instead of having a foot like this, I had a foot like that. It was out, and I was sort of walking on the end of that bone. And so that was he just asked questions, and he backed off, which was all that I don't know what had transpired there. Whether he got satisfied or whether he just shown that he was in charge, I don't know. But anyway, I stayed there, and they had a platform like the platform we're sitting on, And they brought in 3 of my crew members. And they weren't hurt very bad, or any at all, really. So we spent the night there, and then we whispered back and forth, don't say anything, because they might be listening. And then by that time, the war, what the heck, they knew more about the war than we did anyway, as enlisted men. But the next morning, the Germans came in, and they took those 3 boys and started them on the road to a camp.
You too?
No.
Not you.
They left me there, and by that time, my ankle was swelled about like this size, and blood blisters like so. And they just left me laying there, and about noon, a German doctor came in, and we all wore towels around our necks, you know, for warmth when we were flying. But I had mine around my foot. He lifted that towel and he let out a roar that I hadn't had any medical aid, and he went over to a field phone. Instead of turning the crank, he picked up the crank and turned the telephone. And he roared, and within 5 minutes there was a truck there, and I was off to a first aid station. So that was my first, and then the first aid station I went to was manned by French people, medics. And all they wanted to all know how the war was going, when it was going to end, because they didn't have. And I said, "Oh, you'll be home by Christmas." Well, I was off a little bit, but there wasn't anything they could do either, except they washed it up and put some bandage on it. And then they called. Then a couple of soldiers, German soldiers, came in. Excuse me, a sergeant and a private. And they were going to transfer me. So we got into a train and we went towards Frankfurt. And somewhere in there, I spent about 12 hours in a little room, about a 4x8, where they held you for interrogation. Well, they didn't talk to me because, heck, I was just a GI, and at this time in the war, I suppose most all the soldiers they had were out fighting because they were getting a little short. But anyway, I could see where some fellows had scratched on a wall as the days went by, and they had a little window about like so up that they could get light, and they'd marked off the days, and the food would be slid in under the door. Well, I didn't get any food in the 12 hours I was there. It was just overnight. And I don't remember exactly where that was. But
well, there was a camp north of Frankfurt there, Oberrüssel.
That's probably
about 10 miles north of Frankfurt there, interrogation center.
Then I was taken into Frankfurt and put in a dungeon down below the railroad station. And that was a scary experience. Wasn't too scared at the time because these 2 soldiers I thought were going to hit, but they were more afraid than I was because they thought the people were going to take me from them, and they were responsible for getting me. And one carried his submachine gun, and he cocked that and swept the crowd back. And the other one was, they took me one on each shoulder and down these ladder to this train below and across and then up to another. Practically carried me to get on another train and get the heck out of there. And then we got into Frankfurt, and then we're put in this dungeon down below, and the next morning they loaded us all out. And I don't know, I must have had help because I don't remember how I got from one train to the other with my bad foot. I don't remember if I had crutches or what. But as we walked out on the platform, all the German people going to work, they were angry, which I can imagine, and they spit and swore, and the German soldiers just kept walking along the side and with their dogs and kept the crowd back. And they got on this. There was sort of a hospital train I got in that time. At least I finally got to a bunk, and the elderly gentleman who'd probably a veteran of the First World War was on this train as a guard or an orderly. And he took a look at my foot and he shook his head and said, well, we'll get there sooner or later. And so to that extent, it'll be a few days. So I was on my way then to Meiningen in central Germany, which is and there they had a hospital. This hospital had been a former opera house. And so they had a multitude of people. Some of them, those boys had been there for 4 years. And some of them were full body casts. And
were the German, most of them German soldiers then in the hospital there?
No, these were all POWs.
POWs?
Yeah,
some of them.
Some of them had caught in Africa and some had caught in Greece. And they had, some of them had been there so long that their minds were a little, fluent, what I don't know how to express it. But then, and a guy with a broken back, he'd have to have a buddy to help him with everything that he did, even all his personal things. But then I was there we were there close enough to be on the bombing targets. They didn't bomb the hospital, but they bombed the railroad yard because there was a terminal of railroad tracks in that area, and they'd bang away on that. And but then we also were able to look out the window if we disregarded the sirens and watch the dogfights between the Germans and the our Focke-Wulf, the RP-47 and Mustangs would fight with the Focke-Wulf and whatever was out there.
Now, where is this place as compared from, say, Berlin? South?
It'd be
southeast?
South. Right about in the center of Germany.
Center of Germany, yeah.
And then we spent some time there, and then
how'd your leg get there, or how'd your ankle get there?
Well,
did they try to help you? Or?
Yeah, we at this hospital, then I got some help with my ankle. I got it set, but that would be about 3 weeks late because it took that long for the swelling to get down to where they could work. And then they had an Australian doctor. He'd gotten caught in Greece, he and his associate, and they tried to set it, but the materials they used were not strong enough to hold. They should have been pinned, really, but they didn't have the equipment to do it, so they tried to keep pulling it back. And for 6 days, every other day, I went in to have this thing cut off.
Novocaine or?
Local.
Local.
Anyway, they said I talked like a madman. And then they, of course, would ask silly questions to get me to say dumb things, but that's what I heard. I don't know.
Yeah.
And so then I was sent to another camp. Now, this was moved up to Stalag 4, up on Polish Upper Poland.
Near Stettin and Danzig, or up in there? Or,
well, it's farther up. Good. I'd have to pronounce the name. Yeah. It's it's up towards Latvia and Estonia.
Oh, way up there. Yeah, I see.
And they that's where the 2nd Air Force Division has that memorial library, or the plaque rather, the German people up in there. And I got Gutzkow or something like that. And we got up there. And
how'd you get up there? Train or
train?
Train.
Train.
It's long. That's quite a trip, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, because they put about 8 of us in a boxcar and 6 German guards. One was a sergeant and 5 corporals or privates. And then one night, we're in the railroad yard, and the British decided to bomb the railroad yard. So they dropped us right in the middle of the yard and took the engine and the cars out of the heck out of that marshalling yard as fast as they could get them out. And then as the sirens kept getting stronger and stronger, first the sergeant goes and then the corporals go, and pretty soon it was just one lousy private staying there. But we had no place to go, so we just sweated out. But lucky the British didn't have that marshalling yard as a target that night, and but they bombed close enough so you could feel the vibration. But then they came back with the engine and the rest of the train and hooked us up and took us on further up the line. Then we were there from
Do you have any food on this train or water?
Well, they threw in a loaf of bread, you know, how that was. We didn't have much. You know, they were pretty cautious. Of course, the Germans, the army traveled on their own. They get their ration and they carry it, and if it lasted for the day, that was fine. If it lasted for a week, then that was fine too. But they kind of, so the us POWs thought, of course, we were extra and we didn't get any of their food, but
Oh.
but that movement on the train wasn't too bad, except that we had that experience of sitting in there.
Yeah.
Then we went into this place and we found out then that for food there was 24 of us in a room.
It was a big camp now.
Yeah, right.
What's the name of it? Well, it was
Group 4.
4.
Yeah, and
Were there a number of
there was 4
barracks here,
compounds.
blocks?
Yeah, 4 compounds, and we were 10. In our compound, there was 10 barracks.
Were there quite a few there altogether?
Thousands, yeah.
You don't know how many thousands.
No, well, no, I don't. No, I don't have.
Were
an
they
national-
British, Americans, or just
Yeah,
all Americans?
everything.
Everything.
Yeah,
French,
and
Russians.
yeah, Russians, but they were not treated very good. They were
Yeah,
the
no.
detail people.
Yeah.
Had all the dirty detail. While we were there, all I can remember about there is that we had the food was pretty rationed. We got a lot of cabbage soup, potato soup, and some bread. And we get a loaf of bread to divide between 24 guys, and they'd cut the slices that thin, and we were warned right away to watch eating that bread. Look it over before you eat it, because the bakery had been bombed and they'd gotten some bread with that glass. So I don't know whether our guys were just trying to get our bread or what. I mean, our own people, but...
Well, down in this barracks, did you sleep in bunks or in shelves?
No, I didn't.
Or on the floor?
Well, some of them did.
Yeah.
They had 16 bunks.
16.
And then they had some on the table with roll-up bed. And I can't recall much about their first camp. It must have been pretty good. That I can remember the BART camp better, because, of course, I was only there in this one for a few weeks at 4. And then we were there during Christmas. And Christmas, when we did get the night out, they allowed us to go over to the daycare center or the day center and have an ecumenical prayer service and walk around the compound until 9 o'clock. And then they shut us in. But most of the time we were shut in at dusk.
Yeah.
And the
Now, that's
shutters
a picture of you in camp there, isn't it?
they took that in one of the settings. I don't recall having it taken, but it was in our file. And when we took over the camp, we got our people got their
Might have
file.
been taken there at Frankfurt, there at that interrogation center.
Probably.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just turned up. Now I'm going to go on over to BART.
Well, how'd you get now? What did
Okay.
did that camp fold up, or did everybody leave? Or
Yes, they did. Now this is on January 30th, and I think I was a part of a group, and I was still handicapped. So I got to get in a railroad car, and we were in there, I think, 10 nights, 11 days, and something like that, and just cramped in those cars. I don't remember the number of people. It was 40 and 8 cars, but that was for 40 people and 8 horses, but we had 48 men, I think, in there. But I don't know, that one of the smart things I did, I sat right by the door. So I got condensation dripping, and I had my tin cup, and I caught that, so I at least had water to drink. It wasn't probably the purest stuff, but it was better than nothing. And we had a lot of dysentery. A lot of people were sick as they went, because they had one pail was set in there for the general sick upheavals of stomach and so forth.
well,
And it
now,
was very...
did you get any food?
Threw in a few more loaves of bread.
Black bread. And
Yeah, the black bread and that, and very little water.
very little water.
But anyway, we survived it. But And I think there were 12 cars in that train with these guys, with the people handicapped. They arrested the camp, and the next day were put on the road. Were you with that? And
they were march.
They were in a forced march, and they marched for 86 days. And as the Russians were cutting off that area on the way to Berlin.
Where did they march to?
Well, they just walked between the lines.
Yeah, but
I don't know. I don't know any.
I mean, they didn't go. They didn't follow. They didn't come up to Barth.
No. They
you
went
were the
back.
ones.
Yeah, we were taken by train to Barth.
Yeah.
And right out to the camp.
Yeah.
I never walked a bit then because I didn't. But anyway, then on April 30th, 45, or May 1st, I don't know which it was, the guards left our tower and we took over the camp.
Now, can you tell us a little bit about Barth, or that camp that you were in? How big it was, or?
I don't have an idea of the number of people, but there was the same kind of setup. While we were in Barth, Max Smelling visited there, and along with Red Cross representatives. Those were our dignitaries, and our people, under the command of Colonel Zipke from Montana, set up their own force to take over the camp. And when the Germans left, they took over the camp. They took they were told, our people were told not to go out through Russia, but some of them had to get hurried up to get out there. And then they'd heard that there was a girls' camp up the road a bit, so of course a lot of GIs took off for there. And some of them, I don't know if they ever were heard of again. But because I was a farm boy, and they thought maybe they would be moving us again with horses and wagon, they said, "Can you drive horse?" And I said, "I sure can." So anyway, that was my job, was going to be in transportation. So I got into it, what they called, I was a transportation sergeant. I sat at a telephone and just sat at a telephone board. When we took over this transportation thing, I think we had 2 cars and 2 bikes. But then we had a lieutenant that was a ex-ranger. He'd been captured as a ranger, so he had no fear, and he went out and they confiscated cars. And when we left 2 weeks or 3 weeks into May, they'd run through 40 cars. They'd gotten a dozer and cut a hole in the hill, so they'd have a parking lot. They just to keep the troops busy. They didn't want them going through Russia, and all the time we were negotiating with the American line, or trying to.
Did the Russians liberate you?
Yes, they cut us off, yeah.
Do you remember the Russians coming to the camp?
Oh, yeah, we had that, not just regular soldiers, the regular army, we had the followers, the drinkers and AWOLs and so forth. They
had some Cossacks. Did you ever see any of those Cossacks up there with horses?
No, we didn't. No, we didn't. We had the poor, disciplined army people. A private with a gun was more important than a captain if he had the good drop on him. Yeah. Because I know he took a bicycle away from the captain, and the last we heard, the captain was out looking for a gun. He was going to get that bicycle back. That was the kind of stuff. And they couldn't figure out why we didn't want to go through Russia.
Yeah.
And of course,
incidentally, there were some prisoners of war that did go through Russia.
Right, and we don't know.
Yeah.
I have never heard whether I didn't have any my friends, so I don't know if
Stuart Bakken.
Yeah,
you know him.
Yeah.
He was sent through Russia. He went to Odessa and so on and so forth. And got back. Yeah.
And there was this Leonard Rose. That's the vice president of this 2nd Air Force Association.
Yeah.
He was held up from that marching group. Then Russia caught up and they put him in prison for a while. Yeah. There are a lot of funny stories that goes with it, but I'm not going to add those. Anyway, we got to liberated, and we're flowing out to Camp Lucky Strike and spent 3 weeks in Lucky Strike waiting to get on a ship. And we got on a transport and came home.
Did you ever run into any of your other crew members now?
No, not any of my crew members. No. But I had an incident there where a friend from home here that I'd gone to school with, and who was a ground person over in England, and I'd written him, and we tried to get together in London, and we had never been able to do so. But he was out at Lucky Strike, and as I walked around my plane, I ran into him. He was out there to see who was coming back. So he was just as surprised as I was. But that was my first inclination that that he was around. Yeah. And he'd heard from home, and he'd heard that I was a POW, and that my people knew I was a POW.
How did your folks get notified that you were a POW? Did they
through the Red Cross and the German people? So that was in those telegrams they have there that they were notified that I was a POW, and that was, let's see now.
Were you married at that time?
No, I wasn't.
No.
And I didn't know if my wife, my fiancée, was married. I hadn't, and all those 10 months, I never got a note from home or.
You never got a note?
Nothing, no.
Did they get any word from you?
Oh, yeah. And I have a couple of those letters on that stack there, that a card that I had sent to my folks, and a card to, and that. And we got 2 letters and 3 cards, I think, a month that we could send home.
Oh yeah.
And so I got to send them out.
But did they get them?
Yeah, they got them.
They got them.
Some of the letters were cut up a little.
Yeah.
See, there's a letter my wife was going to send to me, and I never got.
You never got that?
No, but that's the kind of letters that she was.
That email kind of.
And she wrote.
Or prisoner of war mail,
yeah. Every day, she said, or every week anyway.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. But and of course, she was home here, and
where was she living then?
She was living in Cavalier. She's a school teacher.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And we'd talked about getting married. In fact, I was talked about getting married on one of my furloughs, and she said, "No, I can't do that," which we didn't. And so, she was home here, and so when I got to the States, or when she heard I was on my way home. She talked to her priest and find out and he said, well, why don't you get the material in case you do? And she said, well, I don't even know if we're going to like each other anymore. And so, anyway, she was there. And
then there's a telegram there, Western Union telegram.
That's my father and mother. They got that tells that I was through the International Red Cross, that I'm the general. And then there was another one that said that I'm back in the States. And then I'd be communicating, and then I did send a couple too when I got back.
How'd you get from Camp Lucky Strike then? Did you?
They put us right on it.
On a ship. On a ship.
Yeah. On a transport, Butler. But of course, we flew out of our BART camp. We flew out of there with B-17s. Yeah. They lifted us out.
And then where'd you fly then? From Barth to
Lucky Strike.
Yeah,
right.
Did you get something to eat then when you got to Lucky Strike?
Yeah. Then we started eating. Yeah. So of course, we started eating when the Germans took off.
Sure. Yeah.
They went out. Yeah, because we found a whole warehouse full of Red Cross parcels, and they said they were out.
Yeah.
And so some of the guys ate, and then of course, we as Americans we're kind of scavengers, so. We went up and found a herd of cattle, or rounded up a herd of cattle, and they butchered and brought them back, and so we were all eating big steaks. That was, to me, that was bad news. But and of course, a lot of the Germans were glad to see that the war was over.
Yeah.
And then of course,
they were almost worse shaped than the POWs.
Yes, they were, and our people. Some of them abused them, and there's, like I say, there's a lot of stories there, but I'm not going into that. So I came home, and we got married, and we went out to the West Coast for an R&R.
Oh, where'd you go, to Santa Monica?
Yeah, Santa Monica.
Yeah.
And
how'd you get out there? Train or?
Yeah, right. We went on our own to get out there, and we got to Santa Monica, and then I think it was 17 days of top of the day living. Yeah. We just fooled around during the day and had a great big hotel suite, and bed was turned down, and candy on the pillow, and a newspaper in the morning, and we get up and we go over to the commissary and eat for 75 cents a day, or a meal or something like that. But then in the meantime they reclassified me, and were prepared to send me someplace. So I was sent to, I went to Sioux City. They asked where you want to go, and I said Grand Forks, Fargo, and Sioux Falls. Well, they came back and said they're all closed. There are no stations there. So they sent me to Sioux City, and they cut the orders for Sioux City, and I got the order, and excuse me, I went into my travel officer, and I said, I need some help. And he said, oh, what can we do? And I said, well, I'm a newlywed, and I've got a little wife from North Dakota here, and we haven't traveled enough to be up on it. How are we going? What can you suggest to get her back into the South Dakota or North Dakota? He said, well, let's see your travel orders. So he looked at him and he said, well, there are 3 of you guys going to Sioux City. And he said, well, you said you were just married. Could you and your wife get along with an upper bunk? and I said, we sure could. So she got on the troop train, and of course she got a lot of hassling by us in the upper bunk, but we got on.
You got a troop train from
L.A.
From L.A.
to going into Chicago and dropping us off at Sioux City.
Yeah.
Anyway, the first time we went for meals, they had 5 or 6 cars on the front of the train, and the cook car, and then some more on the back. And these 2 boys went through ahead and said, lady coming through, and you know those GIs, what they said. But then she came wandering through with her head down, and she said she'd saw more khaki shorts than that trip. And then, anyway, so she's one of the few ladies that have that I know of been on a troop train.
Yeah, I never heard of that before.
And then there was a captain's wife on the back half. Oh. So there was one coming from each way.
Yeah.
And then we were back. We went back to the farm, but there was nothing to do at the farm. I mean,
how many brothers and sisters do you have?
I have 2 brothers. Yeah. But
and you had a farm. Your dad had.
My dad had a farm, right? Yeah.
Where is that located now?
Right south of Mayville, right?
Right
yeah,
south.
Right. Where it's all been sold off now because it's been a different thing. So I decided to go back to school. And
whereabouts?
In Mayville State.
Mayville State.
And we got part-time jobs, and then I got public law assistance. Yeah. So we went to school for $105 a month.
What about your wife?
She went to school too.
I see.
Yes, but she didn't. She at first didn't go to school, but then she decided she'd do some work and go to school. And of course, along about that time, we started. Family was on the way, and so we. But anyhow, she worked for a while, and then we had our baby, and I finished school a couple years later, and went out teaching, and we went up to Northwood, North Dakota, and.
You got what? You get 2 years. You got a teacher certificate then.
No, I had 2 years in, so I finished mine off. And
you got
my BS.
Yeah.
And I went up there as a coach and teacher, and
at Northwood.
At Northwood for $2,800 a year.
Sure.
And had all the subjects and all the sports, so I didn't have much time. And then we couldn't find housing, so we got 2 front rooms in a house. And we had to buy a little kerosene stove, and so we kind of put up with it till the second year we got the whole house. But anyway, that's part of the things we did. Yeah. Snowstorms in 48, 49, 47, 48, 48, 49.
But you, how long did you teach school? How many years?
2 and started the 3rd.
Oh, yeah.
And then I came on the route and the first
got a government job with the post office.
Yeah, a post office in 1st December in 48, 49.
Pretty well satisfied with your job and so on with the post office?
Well, yeah, it's good security, and I got 32, retired with 35 because of my Army time, and got a good retirement.
How many children do you have?
We had 8 children, 1 girl and 7 boys.
I see. Are they all living?
Yes, they are. And
how's the Veterans Administration and government treated you since you come back?
Fine. I have no complaints. I don't think I used 2. I used my local doctor, and I used the doctor there. So, and they're both treating me, and as you notice, I keep coughing because I keep getting stuff coming up. But
Yeah.
I usually get that up when I'm walking, but today I've talked more. And
Well, you did a good job talking, I'll tell you that, yeah.
So, yeah, we have our children scattered out. We only have
Sure.
2 in North Dakota.
Oh, yeah.
We got 2 in Minnesota and one south.
You're
one-
retired now then,
Right,
Yeah.
we both are, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Living in Mayville or?
yeah, right. I live.
Got any special hobbies or?
Not me. I
No.
just do
Take
what
it
my
easy.
wife says.
Yeah, I see.
And she keeps us pretty busy.
Well, I suppose.
She's a goer.
Yeah.
And she says
Well,
it's better to wear out than to rust out. So it gives us a good
Well,
run.
we enjoyed your visit we had with you, Dan, and we learned a lot of things about you and the war and
The,
so on and so forth. So, anything else you want to say, or?
no, there's
I mean, I know there's a million little things.
yeah,
but I
right.
think, I think
And
you pretty
know,
well
you don't know how
covered
to sort them out. They.
You covered
and,
most of the things, and I think there's turned out real
I
well.
was disappointed not being a pilot.
Well, yeah.
But I knew as soon as I started flying that I was not going to be a fighter pilot.
No.
But I had hoped to be able to stick in there good enough to fly
Yeah. Well.
either bombers or transports.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Well.
And
You were perhaps just happened to run into the wrong thing, wrong guy at the wrong day.
That's
see?
right. And
Yeah.
at that time, a month earlier, we could have got to be bombardiers or navigators.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Well,
But then they didn't need them anymore, so they needed gutters. So there we got to be
Yeah.
and radio operator. And I fiddled around with my radio, and in England there we'd practice, but we'd go to the Radio Shack and we'd shoot out a message to their receiver, and we'd say, how high are we? And he'd say, you're 12 feet off the ground in a tower and stuff like that, just so he could take it out.
Yeah.
But this was all fine.
Well, that's real good. How's your health been since you?
Well, just so. I've got a asthma, emphysema condition. I smoked for too long.
How's it's damp weather? Doesn't do
Yes,
any
it
good.
does.
That bothers
I
me. Yeah.
do. I have a lot of puffers. And,
But you're up and around every day and
Oh, yes.
active. I mean, yeah.
Right. And if I can get on my treadmill and keep moving, I'm doing good. And I've got a lot of pills. But
Sure. Well, thanks a lot. Real nice of you.
it's my
coming in.
pleasure. I'm glad to get in on this program.
Well,
And,
I think it'd be worthwhile for someone down the line, your kids and on the street.
When they sound the last all clear, how happy my darling